The ground was still warm from the bombs. Reed walked through the ash with his rifle low and his eyes moving slow. Around him, other soldiers did the same, spread out, quiet, stepping over bent metal and broken glass. The outpost had been hit hard. Whatever it was before, it was rubble now. Flat stone walls, melted equipment, the smell of burnt wiring and something else, something older, like earth after rain, except wrong somehow. Sergeant Gora moved at the front. He was big even for a Breathian, nearly 7 feet, gray-skinned, with 3 eyes that never seemed to blink at the same time. He had been doing this kind of sweep for 20 years. He moved like it. Steady. Cold. His voice came through the earpiece flat and low. Fan out. Check the east side. I want anything with a data chip flagged and bagged. Survivors unlikely, but standard protocol. Reed peeled off toward the far end of the outpost alone. The others went left. The rubble was thicker here, more piled up, like the airstrike had hit something structural and the whole section had folded inward. He climbed over a collapsed wall carefully, testing each step before putting weight on it. He was not thinking about anything in particular. That was the thing about this kind of work. You stopped thinking in sentences after a while. You just moved and watched and listened. And then he heard it. Not a voice, not a signal, just a sound, small, unsteady, like something breathing wrong. The kind of breathing that meant something was hurt and had been hurt for a while. He stopped. He stood still for a full 10 seconds and listened again. There it was. He followed it, moved a piece of metal sheet, shifted a chunk of stone that must have weighed 40 kilograms, which surprised him a little because he barely noticed the weight. Underneath was a half-crushed storage case, cracked open on one side, and inside the crack, curled up in the dark, was something alive. Reed crouched down and looked at it for a long moment. It was small, barely the size of his closed fist, covered in scales that were dark gold at the spine and lighter at the belly, almost pale, almost glowing. It had 4 limbs, a tail, and 2 wings, one of which was bent at an angle that made Reed's jaw tighten. Its eyes were closed. Its sides moved in short, uneven pulls. He had no idea what it was. He had never seen anything like it. The coalition briefings covered the major species on Draven 7. This was not in any briefing. This was something that should not have been here at all. He reached out slowly and put 2 fingers near its nose. It breathed against his skin. Warm. Alive. It opened one eye. Just one. Just part way. Dark amber, catching the gray light from above. It looked at him. He looked at it. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then it made a sound. Very quiet. Not a growl. Not a cry. Something in between, like it was asking a question it did not have words for. Reed looked around. He looked back at it. He thought about the protocol. He knew what the protocol said. Flag anything living. Report to Gora. Let the squad medic or the science team handle it. He thought about all of that for approximately 3 seconds. Then he took off his helmet, which he had been carrying under his arm since the climb over the wall, and he set it gently on the ground beside the creature. He found a strip of insulation fabric in the rubble nearby, clean enough, soft enough, and he laid it inside the helmet. Then, as carefully as he had ever done anything in his life, he lifted the creature with both hands. It was lighter than it looked. It did not fight him. It made the small sound again and then went quiet. He set it inside the helmet on the fabric. It turned once, slowly, like a dog circling before lying down. Then it curled up, tucked its tail around itself, folded its good wing over its body, and went still. Reed watched it for a moment. Then he found another scrap of fabric and draped it loosely over the top of the helmet so that it was covered but had air. He stood up. He picked up the helmet carefully in both hands and carried it against his chest. He walked back toward the squad. Gora's voice came through the earpiece again. Reed. Status. East side clear, Reed said. Nothing viable. Mostly structural collapse. Copy. Start moving back to the rally point. Reed moved back. He held the helmet the same way the whole walk. Level, steady, both hands. At one point Bren fell in beside him and gave the helmet a look because Reed was not wearing it, which was not like him. Helmet busted? Bren said. No, Reed said. Bren waited for more. Nothing came. He shrugged and moved on. Inside the helmet, under the fabric, the creature breathed in short, quiet pulls. Still warm. Still alive. Still curled up like it had found the only safe place left on this entire burnt planet and had decided, without any discussion, that it was not leaving. Reed did not say anything to anyone. He just carried it home. It had been 3 days and Reed was getting good at lying by saying nothing. He kept the helmet in his footlocker. He drilled 2 small holes in the side for air, which he covered from the outside with a strip of dark tape so they looked like damage. He stole food from the mess hall in his pockets. Soft stuff, easy stuff, things he could mash small with his fingers. He brought water in a spare cap. The creature ate slowly at first, suspicious of everything, and then all at once like it had decided to trust him and was not going to do it halfway. It slept most of the time. When it was awake, it was quiet. It watched him with those dark amber eyes and did not make much sound. The wing was worse up close. The joint was wrong, swollen, dried blood at the fold. Reed cleaned it as best he could with the kid in his pack. He had no idea if he was doing it right. He just tried to be careful. On the 4th day, Bren needed the footlocker key. Reed was at the wash station at the other end of the barack, and by the time he heard the footlocker open, he was already moving back, too fast, which made Bren look up. Bren was standing there holding the helmet in both hands, looking down into it. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he looked at Reed. "Reed," he said very slowly, "there is a small dragon in your helmet." "I know," Reed said. "It is looking at me." "I know. It does not look afraid of me." "It is not afraid of much," Reed said, and took the helmet back carefully. The creature had not moved. It was looking at Bren with the calm expression it gave everything, like it was taking notes. Bren sat down on his bunk. He rubbed his face. He looked at the helmet again. "Where did you find it?" Reed told him. Short version. "The outpost. The rubble. The storage case." Bren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to call it Spark." "You're not calling it anything," Reed said. "Spark. Because of the belly. See how the belly is lighter, like embers?" Reed looked. He did not say anything. "Spark," Bren said again, satisfied. He leaned closer. The creature leaned toward him slightly, tilted its head, and then leaned back. "It's deciding things about me," Bren said, delighted. Reed said, "Don't tell anyone." Bren said, "Obviously." He told Dr. Fail the next morning. Not on purpose. Fail was the base medic, four-armed, Lycian, with translucent skin that showed the blue lines of his veins running up to his face like a road map. He was precise and careful, and he noticed things. When he saw Reed heading to the mess with food in his pockets for the 3rd day in a row, he simply asked the question directly, "What are you feeding?" Bren, walking beside Reed, said, "A dragon." Phil stopped walking. "A Dravari," he said. His voice was completely different, flat in the way that meant the opposite of calm. They showed him. Phil stood over the helmet for a long time without touching anything. When he finally looked up, his expression was something Reed could not read easily, something between wonder and a very controlled kind of grief. "A live one," Phil said quietly. "You know what it is?" Reed said. "I know what it was," Phil said. "I did not think there were any left." He explained, as quickly as he could, standing in the barack with his 4 arms folded tight against his chest. "The Dravari, native to Draven 7. Ancient, empathic, bonded creatures. The Vel Dominion had been strip mining the planet for 60 years, and the Dravari population had collapsed along with the ecosystem. The research outpost Reed had swept, Vel Dominion scientists studying what was left, apparently studying the last clutch of eggs. Fail said, "The wing needs proper treatment. I can do it." But Reed, Dravari bond. Once it bonds to a person, separation is dangerous for it. More than physically. Reed said, "It already did." Phil looked at him. "How long ago?" Reed said, "The second I picked it up." Phil closed his eyes briefly. "Open them. Then we have a problem." The problem arrived at the barack door that evening in the shape of Sergeant Gora. Someone had talked. Not Bren, not Phil. Someone else had seen something and passed it up the line. Gora stood in the doorway with his 3 eyes moving slowly between Reed, the footlocker, and the helmet sitting on Reed's bunk. "Show me," Gora said. Reed showed him. Gora looked at the creature for a long time. The creature looked back. Neither of them blinked. Then Gora reached one large gray hand toward the helmet, slowly, like even he was being careful without meaning to. The creature bit him. Not hard, just once, quick, on the end of one finger, and then retreated back into the helmet and tucked its nose under its tail. Gora pulled his hand back. He looked at the small mark on his finger. He looked at Reed. Reed said nothing. Gora said, This is against 14 coalition regulations. Reed said, I know, Sergeant. Gora was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the helmet again. The creature had not moved. It was pretending to be asleep in the way that made it obvious it was not asleep. 72 hours, Gora said. Fail treats the wing. I file nothing for 72 hours. After that we talk. He left. He did not look back. Bryn waited until the footsteps were gone and then said, very quietly, he wanted to pet it. He did not want to pet it, Reed said. He absolutely wanted to pet it. In the helmet, the creature uncurled its tail, stretched once, and went back to watching the door. The war did not stop for one small creature with a torn wing. But the war slowed down, the way it sometimes did between pushes, and for a stretch of 12 days the base settled into something that felt almost like routine. Patrols, maintenance, card games in the mess. The kind of time that soldiers filled with small things because thinking too far ahead was bad for the nerves. Reed used the time to sit with Fail in the medical bay and watch the wing heal. Fail had set it properly on the second day, a careful procedure that involved a very thin brace made from a bent comm antenna and a strip of surgical wrap. The creature had not enjoyed it. It had made a sound like steam escaping through a crack, high and sharp, and Reed had put his hand flat against its back and held it there until the sound stopped. After that it had been still and let Fail finish. You calmed it, Fail said after. I just held it, Reed said. Fail had given him a look that Reed did not fully understand at the time. On the 5th day Fail made a call. The hologram that came through was an old Lycian woman named Sol, Archivist Sol, technically, though she said to skip the title after the first 30 seconds. She had 4 arms like Fail and the same translucent skin, but her veins had gone silver with age. She was a xenoanthropologist. She had spent 40 years studying the Dravari before the war made that work impossible. When she saw the creature on the camera feed, she was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the connection light blinked 3 times. Then she said, show me the belly. Reed tilted the creature gently. It allowed this with the expression of something that was permitting a great indignity. Sol made a sound that was not quite a word. Then she said, it is young. Very young. A few weeks at most outside the shell. She asked a series of fast questions. What it ate? How much? Did it respond to sound? Had it shown any spatial problem solving? Reed and Fail answered. She listened without interrupting. Then she leaned back, and she told them what she knew. The Dravari were not animals. That was the first thing and the most important thing. They were a people. No ships, no written language, no cities in any form that the coalition had initially recognized as civilization, but a people nonetheless. Deeply communal, entirely oral. Their history was carried in memory and passed through bonded pairs, from the older to the younger, the way other species passed down libraries. When the Vel Dominion came and the habitat collapsed and the population shrank to nothing, what died was not just a species. It was an entire way of knowing. Thousands of years of memory gone. The research outpost, Sol said. The Vel Dominion scientists were studying the last clutch. A small scientific interest, nothing more. They wanted data. They did not particularly care whether the eggs survived the process. Reed looked at the creature in the helmet. It was listening. He had no proof of that. It just seemed, from the way its ears were angled, like it was listening. Sol continued. Dravari bond through emotional resonance. Their empathic sense is not a metaphor. It is biological. They feel the emotional state of those around them the way other species feel temperature. And they bond to the resonance, not the body. She paused. What were you feeling when you found it, soldier? Reed thought about it. The crater. The sound. The breathing. He said, I just wanted it to be okay. Sol nodded like that was exactly the answer she expected. To a newborn Dravari, that kind of feeling, simple, direct, no calculation behind it. It reads like a signal fire. It would have felt you before it saw you. Fail said, and now that the bond is formed? Sol's expression shifted. Not sad exactly. Something more careful than sad. The Dravari do not release bonds willingly. If the bonded person is lost, she chose the word deliberately. The Dravari will search for the nearest matching resonance. Someone who feels the same. Sometimes they find one. Sometimes the search is too long. Reed understood what she meant. He did not say so. After the call ended, he sat for a while in the medical bay without talking. The creature climbed out of the helmet, walked across the cot, and sat on his knee. It had never done that before. It sat there and looked at the wall, and Reed looked at the wall too, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say. He named it that night. Not out loud. Not to Bryn or Fail. Just in his head. In the private way you name things you are not sure you are allowed to keep. He called it Cinder. After the base. After the planet. After the smell of the place where he found it. It felt right without feeling sentimental, which was the only way Reed could manage that kind of thing. Cinder, for its part, had by now figured out the footlocker latch, solved it in under a minute when Fail set it as a test, working the mechanism with one claw and its nose with a focused patience that made Fail reach for his notes with shaking hands. It had also begun to mimic sound. Sure things. Patterns of clicks and hums. Once, very clearly, it reproduced the sound of Gora's voice saying standard protocol, which made Bryn fall off his bunk laughing. Gora, told about this afterward, said nothing. But he stopped by the medical bay the next morning on a route that was technically out of his way. He stood in the door for a moment. Cinder looked at him. He looked at Cinder. He left without speaking. But before he went, very briefly, when he thought no one was watching, his expression was not the face of a sergeant deciding what to do about a regulation problem. It was something else entirely. Something that, on a human face, would have been easy to name. Reed saw it. He did not say anything. Some things were better left as what they were. The quiet ended without warning, the way it always did. A Vel Dominion armored column pushed south from the ridge line and hit the Coalition supply route at 3 points in the same hour. Gora had the squad geared and moving in 11 minutes. Reed put on his helmet in the dark of the barack, hands working the straps on instinct, and then stopped. Cinder was inside it. Not sleeping. Awake. Sitting up straight, wings folded, eyes open and steady in the dark. Reed looked at it. He thought about the medical bay. Fail was there. The footlocker was there. There were places he could leave it. Safe places. He thought about all of that in the space of about 4 seconds. Cinder looked back at him. It did not move. It did not make a sound. It just looked at him with those amber eyes in a way that was not asking and not demanding, just waiting to see what he would decide. Reed put the helmet on. Cinder shifted inside, adjusted its weight, and settled low against the back of his skull where there was a small curved space between the padding and the shell. It fit there neatly, like it had measured the space in advance. Reed could feel the warmth of it against the back of his head. Small, steady, alive. He moved out with the squad. Gora saw Reed's helmet and said nothing. Bryn saw it and gave Reed a quick look and also said nothing. That was one of the things Reed valued most about both of them. They reached the northern supply corridor in the dark and spread out along a broken ridge. Below, the Vel Dominion scouts were moving through the valley in a way that Coalition sensors had not yet picked up. Too low, too slow, staying under the thermal signature of the rock. The kind of movement that would have gone unnoticed until it was very close. Except that Cinder tapped twice on Reed's skull. Reed went still. He held up a fist, and the squad stopped. Gora came close in a crouch, and Reed said quietly, "Movement. Valley floor. Left of the dry channel." Gora looked through his scope. Waited. Then he saw it. A scout team, for individuals, moving in single file along the base of the rock face. Gora pulled back. He looked at Reed. "How did you get that?" "Your scanner is off." Reed said, "Good ears." That was the first time. It was not the last. For 6 hours, Cinder sat in Reed's helmet and tapped. Once for clear, twice for movement somewhere ahead. 3 times, which happened twice that night, and made Reed's blood go cold both times, for immediate danger. Every tap was right. The squad moved differently because of it. Faster when the path was clear, slower when it was not. Gora started watching for the signals without being told. Bryn started counting taps under his breath like a habit he had picked up without noticing. Nobody said anything about it directly. In the field you just used what worked. Then Reed got separated. It happened fast, the way bad things always did. A secondary explosion from a buried Vel Dominion charge. Not a trap exactly, just old ordnance finally going up under the wrong footstep. The ridge fractured. Reed went down one side. The squad went the other. And suddenly there was a wall of rock and dust between them, and his comms were full of static, and his left side hurt where he had hit the ground, and he did not know how hard yet. He pressed himself against a boulder and checked his rifle and thought. The valley was not clear. He had Vel Dominion between him and any reasonable route back. Going forward was going deeper into their line. Going back over the fractured ridge was possible, but would take time and noise. None of the options were good. He sat there for a moment in the dark and thought about Cinder, which was not tactically useful, but happened anyway. Then Cinder moved. Reed felt it shift inside the helmet, moving to the front, climbing toward the visor, which was open. He put his hand up instinctively to block it, and Cinder pushed past his hand with a patience and firmness that was somehow both small and absolute. It came out of the helmet. It stood on the rim of the visor in the dark, both wings spreading slowly, the torn one still slightly low but functional now, mostly healed. Reed said, barely a sound, "Don't." Cinder looked at him. Then it looked at the sky. Then it released light. Not fire. Nothing hot or violent. Light. From the belly, from those pale gold scales, a pulse of bioluminescence that went up in a short, tight burst, aimed directly at the sky like something very old and very specific was aiming it. A signal. Not random. A pattern Reed would later learn, from Sol, had not been used by any living Dravari in over 100 years. The Dravari distress signal. Ancient and unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Bryn knew what to look for. Bryn had spent 3 weeks watching that belly glow faintly when Cinder was happy or warm or half asleep, and he knew the difference between that soft background light and this. He saw it through a gap in the ridge from 150 meters away, and he grabbed Gora's arm and pointed. They found Reed in 6 minutes. After, when the squad was back together and moving toward the extraction point, Gora fell in beside Reed without any particular announcement. They walked in silence for a while. Then Gora said, quietly, so that only Reed could hear, "It signaled for you." "I know," Reed said. "Not for itself," Gora said. "It was not in danger. It signaled for you." Reed did not answer. Gora was quiet for another 100 meters. Then he said, "When we get back, I will file a report. I am classifying it as a coalition intelligence asset. Experimental Sensory Support Unit. That is a different category from foreign fauna. Different regulations entirely." Reed looked at him. Gora kept walking, eyes forward. His expression was exactly what it always was. 3 eyes, gray skin, 20 years of war in the set of his jaw. "Don't thank me," Gora said. "It makes things complicated." Inside the helmet, against the back of Reed's skull, Cinder had settled again into its small curved space. Warm. Still. Already half asleep, the way it always was after it had done something that costed effort, like it ran on something deeper than food and sleep and was now quietly refilling. Reed put his hand up once and rested it against the side of his helmet for a moment, the way you might put your hand on the shoulder of someone walking beside you. Then he dropped it and kept moving. 3 months after the ridge, the Vel Dominion stopped pushing. It did not happen with a dramatic battle or a final stand. It happened the way most wars actually ended, with tired people sitting in rooms on both sides, adding up numbers, and deciding the numbers no longer made sense. The armistice was announced on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, the coalition base on Draven 7 was already processing soldiers for departure. Crates were packed. Equipment was cataloged. The war moved from something that was happening to something that had happened, and everyone was still figuring out what to do with that. Reed was called to the command office on Thursday. He went in with his helmet under his arm, which was the only way he went anywhere now. Cinder had grown in the past weeks, no longer fist-sized, closer to the size of a large house cat, with a wingspan that could stretch to Reed's elbow when it was feeling dramatic. It still preferred the helmet, still curled there by default, though now it mostly sat in it rather than disappearing inside. The command office had been converted into a temporary administrative space. There were 2 coalition officials at the table, not soldiers, civilians in gray formal dress, the kind of people who came in after wars to count what was left. One was a tall Breathian woman Reed had never seen before. The other was a shorter Lycian man with the look of someone who had already made a decision and was here to announce it. They wanted Cinder. The Lycian man explained it calmly and in complete sentences. The Dravari were considered a protected species under coalition ecological law, now that the armistice had opened the door to proper surveying of Draven 7. Cinder was, as far as anyone could confirm, the last living Dravari. That made it a matter of coalition-wide significance. There was a xenobiology facility on the station Prel 9, suitable environment, expert care, proper resources. Reed was a soldier. His next assignment was unknown. A controlled facility was the responsible option. Reed listened to all of this without moving. Then he put his helmet on the table. Cinder was inside, sitting up, watching the two officials with the calm, flat attention it gave everything new. The Lycian man reached toward the helmet. Cinder looked at his hand. Then Cinder looked at Reed. A short, clear look, the kind that meant it was checking something. Reed gave the smallest nod. Cinder looked back at the hand and allowed 2 fingers to rest near its face briefly. Then it leaned back and tucked its nose under its wing in a way that was not aggressive, but was very clearly done. The Breathian woman said, quietly, "It looked at you before it decided." "Yes," Reed said. "It asked your permission." "Yes." The room was quiet. The Lycian man pulled his hand back. He looked at his colleague. He looked at the helmet. He said, carefully, "That is an unusual level of social cognition for a creature of this age." "Sol would tell you it is not a creature," Reed said. "She would tell you it is a person, a young one, and that moving a bonded Dravari to a facility away from its bonded individual is not conservation. It is a second extinction, smaller than the first, but the same kind." He had not planned to say that. It came out flat and clear, like a fact rather than an argument. Sol said it herself, 20 minutes later, appearing on a hologram at the end of the table because Fail had quietly arranged the call that morning without being asked. She was precise, and she was old, and she had spent 4 decades studying a civilization that no longer existed, and she said what she knew in the voice of someone who was not asking anyone for permission. The vote was not clean. The Lycian man voted against. 2 other officials attending remotely voted for the facility. The Breathian woman and a 4th official, a quiet human Reed had not noticed at the side of the room, voted with Sol. It passed. Cinder was classified as a ward of the Coalition under Reed's personal custodianship. Archivist Sol was listed as academic supervisor. Fail was named as veterinary contact. It was unprecedented. There was no existing form for it. Someone had to build the paperwork from scratch, which took 4 additional hours, during which Reed sat in the hallway outside the command office and Bryn sat beside him, and they did not talk much. At one point Bryn said, "You know this means your next posting is going to be something weird." Reed said, "Probably." Bryn said, "Like a diplomatic ship or something." "Because of Cinder. Because they will want it accessible." Reed said, "Probably." Bryn was quiet for a moment. Then, "I am going to put in for the same posting." Reed looked at him. Bryn shrugged. "I named it first. I have a claim." "You named it Spark." "The name is Cinder." "I named it Spark and then you renamed it, and I am choosing not to hold that against you." The official came out of the office at that point and told Reed he could come back in to sign. Reed stood up. He picked up the helmet. Cinder, who had been asleep through most of the wait, opened one eye. Reed said, quietly, so only the helmet could hear, "We're okay." Cinder closed its eye again. They went in and Reed signed his name on a document that had never existed before and would not exist again, because there had never been another situation like this one and probably never would be. The first Dravari to appear on any official coalition record in 60 years. Listed not as a specimen, not as an asset, despite what Gora's paperwork said. Listed as a ward. Reed walked out of the building into the pale light of Draven 7's afternoon. Bryn was still on the steps. He looked up. "Well," he said. "We won," Reed said. Bryn looked at the helmet. Did Cinder win? Reed thought about it. He thought about a crater full of rubble and a small thing breathing wrong in the dark and an instinct that had no tactical justification at all. Cinder was never in danger of losing, he said. They walked back to the barack. Overhead, the sky over Draven 7 was the dull orange it always was at this hour, lit from underneath by the volcanic rock, warm and strange and nothing like home. But not, Reed thought, entirely unlike it either. The ocean on the southern coast of Reed's hometown had a particular smell in the evening, salt and wet stone and something green underneath, like the sea was breathing out. Reed had grown up with that smell. He had forgotten how much he missed it until he was standing on the deck of his sister Nara's house with his shoes off and the boards warm under his feet, and it hit him like something physical. He had not been home in 4 years. Cinder stood beside him on the railing. The word stood was doing some work there. Cinder was now the size of a large dog, lean and scaled and gold dark across the back, belly pale as old ivory. The wings, fully healed, were folded back in the easy way they went when Cinder was relaxed. It was looking at the water with an expression that Reed had come to recognize as its focused, cataloging look, taking in new information, filing it somewhere internal. A wave came in below, and Cinder's head followed it all the way to shore and back out again. Then it looked at Reed. Reed said, "Water. A lot of it." Cinder looked at the ocean again. Then it stepped off the railing and dropped, wings snapping open, gliding low over the surface in a long, easy arc before climbing back up. It circled once and landed back on the railing and looked at Reed with the particular expression that meant it had decided something and was satisfied. "Don't go in," Reed said. "We do not know how you feel about salt water yet." Cinder looked at the ocean. Then it looked at Reed. Then it looked at the ocean again in a way that was not a promise. Nara came out with 2 cups of something hot and stood beside her brother and looked at Cinder the way she had been looking at it since Reed arrived, with the kind of wonder that people tried to make calm so they would not seem rude, and failed at completely. "It listens to you," she said. "Sometimes," Reed said. "More than sometimes." She handed him a cup. "It listens to you the way," she stopped. "Started again. The way someone listens to a person they have decided to trust completely." Reed did not answer. He drank from the cup. Nara's husband's uncle, a man named Vel who was 73 and had spent 20 years in the Coalition infantry before Reed was born, came out after dinner and sat in the garden with Cinder for an hour. Nobody asked him to. He just took his chair out there and sat, and Cinder went to him and sat nearby, and they were there in the dark for a long time. When Vel came back inside, his eyes were red, and he did not explain, and nobody asked. That night Reed found the old helmet on the shelf in the spare room where Nara had put his things. His field kit, some old personal items, and the helmet, the original one, battered, dented along one side from the ridge, the 2 small air holes in the shell still covered with tape that had gone stiff and dark. He set it on the shelf by his bed and left it there. In the night, he woke up to the sound of something moving, and in the dark, he watched Cinder cross the room, pick the helmet up in both front legs with a carefulness that was almost ceremonial, carry it to the foot of his bed, and curl up inside it. Reed looked at this for a moment. Then he lay back down and slept. He shipped out again 2 weeks later. Bren had been right, as it turned out. The posting was the CCS Resolute, a coalition diplomatic vessel, joint crewed, 6 species, newly launched as part of the Armistice's effort to build something more permanent than a ceasefire. Reed's official title was Interspecies Liaison, which was a new role with vague duties that seemed to mean being present when conversations went wrong and knowing how to stay calm while they sorted themselves out. He was, everyone agreed, surprisingly good at it. Cinder was on his shoulder for most of it, perched there easily, tail curled around his arm for balance, watching the conversations with those amber eyes. It did not interfere. It did not perform. It just watched, and sometimes it would lean forward slightly when something important was being said, and the people in the room would notice and pay a little more attention without quite knowing why. The Resolute had been running for 3 months when the young Vel Dominion diplomat arrived. Her name was Dara. She was one of the first Vel Dominion nationals to serve aboard a joint vessel after the armistice. Young, formal, clearly working hard to be exactly as professional as the situation required. She had been aboard for 2 days before she crossed the common room at the wrong moment and came face to face with Cinder for the first time. She stopped. The color left her face. She stood there and her hands did something involuntary at her sides, and she stared at Cinder with an expression that had too many things in it to name quickly. The Vel Dominion had built the research outpost on Draven 7. The Vel Dominion had strip-mined the planet. The Vel Dominion had found the last Dravari eggs and studied them with detached scientific interest, and then left them in a building that got bombed. Dara knew all of this. She was from the generation that had grown up knowing all of it, carrying the weight of it whether or not they had asked to. Cinder looked at her. A long moment passed. Then Cinder stepped off Reed's shoulder, opened its wings, crossed the room in one smooth glide, and landed on Dara's outstretched arm. She had not offered her arm. Her arm had just come up, the way hands come up to catch something falling, without thought. Cinder sat on her arm and looked at her face. Dara stood very still. Her eyes filled and she blinked and the tears came anyway, and she stood there in the common room of a diplomatic ship with a Dravari on her arm and her face doing things she could not stop. Reed watched from across the room. He did not move. He did not speak. There was nothing he needed to do. There was nothing he could have done better than what was already happening. Later, in his quarters, Reed picked up the old helmet from its place on the shelf. He turned it in his hands. Dented. The tape on the air holes. A small scrape along the visor ridge from the ridge collapse. The inside worn smooth and a little darker than the outside from years of being somewhere warm and alive. He thought about a crater full of rubble and a sound that was too small and a decision that took about 3 seconds and no tactical logic at all. He set the helmet back on the shelf. Outside the porthole, the stars moved slowly past as the Resolute adjusted course. Far behind them and getting smaller, Draven 7 turned in its orbit, volcanic and orange-lit, still warming from the inside. In the common room down the corridor, Dara was still standing with Cinder on her arm. Someone had brought her a chair. She was sitting now. Cinder had settled, wings folded, and appeared to be in the process of going to sleep. It had decided something about her. The way it always decided things. Simply, directly, with no calculation behind it. Reed had learned, in the past year, that this was the thing about Cinder's kind. They felt what you actually were. Not what you said, not what you performed, what you carried. What moved through you when you stood in a ruined place and heard something small still breathing and chose, without thinking, to help. Cinder had felt that in him in a crater on a burnt planet. It had felt something in Dara too, just now. Reed did not know exactly what. He did not need to know. He turned off the light in his quarters and lay down. Down the hall, the ship was quiet. Outside, the stars. The helmet sat on the shelf in the dark, exactly where it had always been since the beginning. A battered, ordinary thing that had somehow become the first safe place in the universe for the last of an ancient people. Reed closed his eyes. Somewhere down the hall, something small and golden was already asleep.